Hello everyone, it's Marjoram of Sage and Marjoram back with a look at one of my current projects. So this video will be talking about the Twill Gamp, which was an assignment in a project in the School of Sweet Georgia Weaving Twill on 4 Shafts study group. So this is a project that we've been working up to. If you saw in my last video, this was actually the last project that I wove in January, but it's the one that I want to talk about the most. The others were kind of just me playing around, but this one I was actually trying to figure out what I was doing. I mean, I guess I kind of knew what I was doing at this point because I'd already done some twills, but I hadn't done the different structures. I hadn't been too diligent in working on my, picks per inch, ends per inch. I always think, the cloth will tell me if it's beat in well enough or if I'm doing it well enough, but I think that there is some merit in, depending on the project, in doing it this way, much more mindful of what you're doing. I like both. I enjoy, getting cloth that has predictable patterns, but I also enjoy kind of going into the calm autopilot of just weaving. So anyways, I've pulled out my Luette Erica. As you can see, this is a 4-shaft table loom that is portable. You can break it down and take it anywhere with you. You can see I'm just putting up the lee sticks so I can warp the way that it's intended with this loom. I think that I want to get some wooden ones, but this is what the loom came with. Same with the Rattle, which is the only part of the loom that I will say I really do not like. I liked it because it's built in, so it's free, and I didn't have to try to figure out how to DIY one or purchase a Rattle. However, you'll see it's kind of finicky. This Rattle really grabs on to whatever you're working with, and that is because it is a 5 dent Rattle, meaning that there are 5 slots per inch. I'd rather have a Rattle that is, in 1 inch or even 2 inch sections, but I'm working with what I have. And so you'll see there's even one point where I realized I needed to go back and adjust because I wasn't going to have enough room on my Rattle. But I think I beamed this at 10 ends per inch, but when I actually went through and came through the reed at the front, I went through at 12.5. And you can see there are 2 different warps here. And so the stripes that are separating the sections, those are in a merino silk. And the stripes that look like barber pole, those are actually natural wool from Mountain Meadow Wool Company. So you'll see what I'm doing right here. I had accidentally pulled 2 ends out of my lee sticks, so I fixed those so that they don't get messed up when I go through and beam and everything. I'm tying onto the back bar, and this is something I'll come back to later because I think this is what gave me issues later on, was when I was beaming my warp onto the back bar. I had some very fun issues later on that I'll get into, which is kind of why I wanted to make this video first. Because even though I'd never had these issues in any of my other projects, I thought that there are issues that folks who are newer to multi-shaft looms at home might also be having. Yeah, so we're just gonna wind the warp onto the back beam now. I really like this Mountain Meadow wool, by the way. It's my favorite for having like a neutral base. I looked into a bunch of weaving color theory like maybe 2 years ago at this point. I was just looking to see, what would be a good base for scarves, because every piece of equipment that I've bought, I've paid for by either Christmas and birthday gifts or money from selling scarves in my Etsy or on my website. And I use this warp. It's my absolute favorite warp that exists. It is from out west in America. It's grown on sheep in pasture in America. and it's processed here as well. I'm not really like a American-made person, but I wanted to cut down on, my environmental impact. And a lot of really good wool on cone that I can find is not from the US. And I found this at Mountain Meadow Wool Company, and it's a light gray that is slightly warm. This is the lighter variant. I have two. I have one that's a little bit darker and a little bit cooler in tone. And they're both wonderful. They are undyed, so the barber pulling just comes from different varieties of sheep and different colors of sheep. Anyways, you see I went through and I threaded my heddles, and that was the end of day one. Now we're moving on to day two. As you can tell, I needed lots of coffee to get through this project. I am using 2 shuttles. Thanks to my lovely aunt and uncle, I was able to pick up some supplies. So I got this. This is a swatch tool actually for knitting, but I use it as a right angle tool. And then I picked up that Handy Woman shuttle, which is in walnut. It's absolutely gorgeous, and it works really well. And I also picked up a bunch more bobbins. I only had 5 bobbins, so now I have so many because of my color Gamp project, and it made weaving this a lot easier. Okay, so I am using my favorite heddle hook. This is a Kromsky Presto hook, and you can see here I'm showing you I actually have a substitution chart for my reed, and so I'm going through and I'm doing 1 1 1 2 when I actually pull these through. And this is actually one of my favorite parts of weaving because it's like, it sounds weird, but I'm like, when I do this, I know I'm in the home stretch, even though it's still the beginning of the project. Because once I start weaving, it's just like, it just goes. And it's really, I don't know, for me, weaving is very calming. It's like self-care in itself. And I have something tangible to show for it at the end. So here we go, going through the reed at the front. You'll see right now, I think I pulled through 4 on the outside borders, but in the end I ended up with 3. And that's because during this process, I snapped one of my floating selvages, I think during beaming, and I hadn't realized it. So when I get to the end, I changed my mind and decided, instead of adding on floating selvages that hang off the back, because I prefer having them, warped on with everything else, I just took them off and made one of the outer threads a floating selvage. And I have 3 in my border instead of 4, like probably everyone else who has woven this Twill Gamp. So here I slowed it down so you can see like the real time of what it takes to get a section done. And it's not that long. It's pretty quick when it goes by. I think that this whole process probably takes a few hours. The process from, going through the rattle, threading all the heddles, after we've beamed the warp, and then coming through the reed probably takes maybe 3 or 4 hours. Yeah. There we go. Okay, now I'm wrapping onto the front, and I'm using, these are helping hands from Ashford, but I have the super skinny ones. I like those a lot. But you'll see later on, I ended up changing stuff, again, because of my issues. But we'll move forward with it like this, pretending I didn't have those issues for now. So what I'm doing here is spreading the warp. I'm using some super chunky yarn that won't really grab onto anything. I can just slide it out later at the end. And I'm doubling it. I'm going through in tabby and just doubling that up and spreading the warp out. It took a couple of passes to actually get it all set, but this makes the next weaving section like super easy. And I do this, I feel like maybe you don't really need to do this. I see some people who don't, a lot of people do, because of the way that I work with my weaving is I like to hem stitch while it's on loom, and once I hem stitch, like spreading the warp feels like it wasn't necessary because the hem stitching changes all of that up again. But I try to be thorough and do what I can. So here's the first pick. I started in tabby just to have a border to hem stitch into, and you can see what I'm doing here is I'm pulling out a very long tail of this first weft yarn. So this is again the silk merino and the like deep mossy green color, and that is my border color. I think that ideally I should have used a slightly darker border color, but I used that one because that's what I had. I had trouble getting a lot of different yarns, and I was going to do the whole thing in silk merino, but I had trouble getting more yarn in because of, you know, just supplies in general. It seemed like everyone was really out because a lot of folks do gifts and such for the holiday, handmade gifts, and so I think that they were out because of that. So this is the pattern I'm using. It's the Sweet Georgia Twill Gamp. You can find the draft for this in the school. I'll put a link down below to the school. You do have to sign up, and then you can get the draft for this. There are some photos by the incredibly talented Felicia Lowe, who is leading the study group and runs the School of Sweet Georgia with her amazing team. Okay, so I wove the border picks, and now I'm actually starting. This part, it's like once you get to this part, to me it feels like the project is done, which is, it's hard to explain, but it's because once I get here, I'm just creating and no longer doing the setup. The setup, while not my favorite part, feels the most involved in terms of, you know, I have to really think about what I'm doing, but once I actually start, I'm just going. And I had a lot of trouble picking on weft color, but I went with this kind of deep forest green. And you'll see I save all of my yarn scraps because I also spin, and I'm like, I'll get all of these scraps, and at some point I'll do some big bat of of just everything and spin it up into an amalgamation of past projects. Okay, so this first section is just straight draw, and I'm just weaving Trompes Rit for the forest green. You'll see later on I'll do a different color and I'll weave it with my own selected treadlings. In this case, a lift plan because I'm on a table loom. So you'll see when I started here, I was trying to be really conscious of my picks per inch. And I also realized I favor one side when I beat, and I really need to beat from the middle. Here you can see I pulled out that swatch tool, and I'm just trying to see, you know, am I getting a 45-degree angle for the most part? Am I getting the right number of picks per inch? I was just counting them in my head there. And it looks okay. So I went forward with just weaving. And little did I know the issues that were to come. See, I was checking, I was like, it's so-so. It's so-so in terms of my beating in that section. And this is like around here is where I started feeling the issues. You can kind of see it on the right-hand side of my warp. It is a lot looser than the left-hand side. A lot looser. And I'm not talking about the beat. I'm not worried about the beat so much because I know this wool really will shrink up, and I'll show you that at the end. It will really shrink in. I'm just talking about the actual warp. I mean, you can see when I'm putting that shuttle through, you can really see how much looser it was on the right before it gets to the left-hand side. And I decided, you know what, let me just like keep going and see how bad it gets. I tried to put some weights on the back with some S hooks to just see if I could deal with it that way. And long story short, it did not work out. But I didn't want to waste all of this warp, so I found a solution. Anyways, let's just keep going with what we have right now. You see, I'm trying my hardest to make it work. And I was carrying, it's hard to see, I think I was going to show it and I just cut it out, but I carried the other weft color up the side because I didn't want to have to cut off and weave in ends. I just wanted to keep going. I don't find that to be too difficult because I've done in the past a fair deal of clasped weaving. So it just feels like a little bit of clasping, or even like a little bit of houndstooth where you're dealing with the side. So I'm like, I can do that for a couple of picks and not be too concerned about it. So here I am weaving. You can see there sometimes like how slow it was getting because I was having to make sure that I was actually getting over that right hand side, and I was really just trying to deal with it. And then it just got to a point where it was so bad. You might be able to tell on screen just looking, like the left hand side looked so taut. And here we are. I cut it off. I was so exhausted of trying to fix it. And so I went through and I rebeamed the warp. I wound the entire thing onto the front after I cut it off. I went to the back and I retightened, and I figured out the problem was actually that one side of my warp fell off of my warping sticks. They just happened to be like too close to the edge, I think. So I went back through and I took out all of my cardboard warping sticks, and I went in and I put in some wooden warping sticks that are actually longer. So there would be no chance of that falling off the end. And I went back through the front and I was like, I don't want any stretchiness at all. I don't want anything. So I went through with some sturdy, heavy worsted dish cotton for knitting or crocheting. And I tied on that way. But you can see here, I think I'll show you all later on, but the tension issues really messed with the shape here. Like you can see it's almost rectangular instead of square. Although you can also see in that short bit of the swatch that it was a lot closer together after being off tension because that wool really shrinks up. It's very stretchy under tension and it really shrinks up as soon as you take it off. And then once you go through and wet finish it, it really settles into place. So there are some points, I think, when I'm weaving the Gamps that it looks like things are like way too far apart or things aren't straight across. And some people might be worried by that. And I think like I would have been worried if it wasn't this wool. Like if I was doing it all in this silk merino, I might have been a little bit more worried. But knowing your yarns, I think, is really important. And so I know that these will really shrink up, and I'm not worried at all about things not being in place, because you'll see when it's finished, things really settle into their places nicely. Okay, so here we are, and there you can see, look at that difference in just fixing my tension. And I'd never had a tension issue ever before. This was my first time ever having a tension issue in my weaving. So I was like very anxious because I was like, I want this to come out well. I want to be able to show off, what I've learned while at the weaving school. And I want to be able to actually do this the right way. So I was very happy that it was, coming together well the second time around. There you can see what I'm talking about. Like some of it gets pretty wavy when I advance the warp, or parts look very intense, but it actually will all be fine. And you'll see here, I didn't actually hem stitch while it was on the loom while I was going. I just wanted to get done because the sun was setting, and I decided to hem stitch overnight, and I kept everything on the loom, and I just used weights to hold it in place to hem stitch as though I was off the loom. So there I just showed I had one more section to do and I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I referenced the Handweaver's pattern directory and just found another treadling sequence that I thought was interesting and went with that. So here we are on the next day again with more coffee and lots of empty bobbins. I was very happy to have gone through all of that. My trusty gingers are going to help me cut this off the loom after coffee. Okay, so there's that hem stitching I was talking about, and I decided since I was doing it as though I was hem stitching off the loom, I would do it in a contrasting color, and so I did. I just went back through with the Weft color, and I did that for both this Gamp and also for the Deep Forest Gamp. I used that one as well. So because I was only weaving 2 Twill Gamps, I decided to cut off behind instead of in front of the reed. This is my second favorite part, I think, of weaving, is pulling it all off the loom. It just feels so nice to have something accomplished, right? Okay, so here we go. I'm so excited to be done with this. You can see some of my chosen patterns there. And then here the forest green is woven Trompus Writ from the pattern. Okay, so this is it fresh off the loom, so don't base all of your judgments on this, but you can already see, after being off tension, how much the weaving has, started settling into place. I think it helps that the weft is somewhat slippery because it is the silk merino in the forest green color. The kind of muted berry is actually just pure highland wool, but it's a superfine highland. Not super wash, just super fine. And, the micron, and it's a fingering weight, a little bit lighter than the forest. But there you can see what it's looking like before I go and I wet finish. And I'm just checking it once more, and it looks so-so. Like, it's not perfect, but I think it's good enough for me. And you'll see after we wet finish and steam some of my thoughts on that. Here I was just comparing the colors of the 2 different Gamps because I think I really like this color combo of like this berry, some sort of cream, and then a dark green. And I'm going to use it in my next project, just in a different variation. So here it is after soaking in vinegar and water, and that is just to lock in the colors before I do my actual wet finishing. That was a tip from Curly and Yarny here on YouTube, to make everything color fast. And here they are after the first round of wet finishing. This is them towel dried. I also finished the first swatch because I wanted to compare them after wet finishing. You can really see the difference here in the fabric. I mean, it looks so much more cohesive, and that's why wet finishing is so important. But here you can see, if I line them up side by side, it's kind of hard to see on camera, but you can see the kind of divider line there. You can see the difference in the sections that are square in the Twill Gamp that I actually completed, and the rectangular sections in the first one with the tension issues. Although I think it's still, good fabric. It's still sound fabric. I will use it for something, whether it's a mouse pad or coasters, I'll use it. So that's why I wanted to, get enough that I could finish it. Now that it's off the loom, I can check the other side and see how it's looking. I think that it came out okay. It's fairly consistent, but it's not perfect. I really like the way that it looks, kind of like, it looks like a sweater. I really like the barber pulled wool. It goes for like a heather gray. I feel like for some eyes it might be a little too busy, but for me, I really like that kind of look of the barber pole. I think that it looks really nice up close, and then when you get far away, it just adds like some depth to the pattern. Now, here's the whole project on my side, the one that I chose. I went through and I decided to do mostly M&Ws. Sorry, I was showing off the warp yarn here I've been talking about for so long. You can see the difference in how squishy it gets after wet finishing. Yeah, I did mostly M&W. I did 2 different M&Ws, and then the last one was... I don't remember what the last one was. It was in the Handweavers pattern directory. I think it was like a big point. Like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 4, 3, 2, 1, I believe is what I did. But I did do also the first section over again. I'll show that off later. I really liked that section, as well as this section here. I thought that they looked like little braids or little chain links when you did a kind of tight M&W. So I was really happy with all of those. Yeah. Okay. And here's the final product. This is after fully drying. I steam it. I steam all of my projects after drying just to make sure that everything is set. Here you can see at the beginning I had some issues with my picks per inch, but I evened it out after the, first section. It was only about 1.5 inches where I was definitely beating too tightly. And so that's why you'll see when I flip it over, I actually redid that section. It's now on the right hand side, but I redid the first section to try to get it more even. And I think it worked out well. I definitely think it looks more consistent. And I really think that the fabric came together well after drying and being steamed. I think that it looks really nice. I could see, I don't know how many people would want to wear a Twill Gamp, but I'm like, I could see this being textile for clothing design. And here's what I mean. You can see here, look at the difference in the silk merino and this other. So I'll show you, here is the main warp on the cone, and then once it's fulled, it is so squishy and bouncy and so thick. It really fills up all those spaces and it shrinks up. Although I did not have any bunching issues with the different shrinkage because the silk merino is so slippery. Okay, that's it for the video. This was a long one. Thank you for sticking with me. I hope you enjoyed. And I will see you all in the next video. I just wanted to show off some of the classwork that I was working on and some of my failures.